All right, let's get right into it. You know those massive infrastructure projects we see all the time? A new power grid, a giant data center. They always promise progress. But let's be honest, they usually come with this hidden price tag, a price that's often paid by local communities and the environment. Today, we're going to explore a new economic blueprint that tries to fix that fundamental problem. This quote just nails the issue, doesn't it? It's all about what economists call externalized costs. Basically, value gets created in one spot, but the messy consequences get pushed onto someone or something else. It's a systemic disconnect, and once you start looking for it, you see it pretty much everywhere. Now, here's where the thinking starts to shift. This is the big question. What if this isn't a problem of not having enough money or resources? What if the solution is just finding and connecting the value that's already been committed, but it's just flowing in completely separate channels? And that brings us to the core diagnosis of the problem. The issue isn't a lack of cash. It's a series of what the source material calls open circuits. Think of them like gaps in our economic wiring that are stopping value from getting where it needs to go. Okay, so this is the key concept to get, an open circuit. Imagine this. One company has a budget to help restore a local river, and another company has a legal obligation to manage its water usage from that same river. They're both working on related problems, right? But their budgets, their teams, their contracts, they're in totally separate worlds. That gap between them, that's the open circuit. So if the problem is these open circuits, what's the fix? Well, this is where we get to the solution. It's a pretty innovative structure called the Regenerative Entity, or RE for short. And it's designed to do one thing really well: find and close these economic gaps. Now, what's really clever about the RE is how it's structured. This isn't some new company that swoops in and takes over. Instead, think of it more like a new layer that sits in between the existing partners. It's something they co-own, a shared tool that lets them coordinate in a whole new way. And this is probably the best analogy for it. The RE is like Waze, but for money. I mean, think about it. Waze doesn't build new roads, right? It just finds the most efficient route using the roads that are already there. The RE does the exact same thing for capital. It maps out these invisible pathways between partners to get resources exactly where they need to go, efficiently. Okay, so that Ways for Capital idea is great, but how does it actually work in the real world? What are the nuts and bolts? Well, it all starts with mapping these circuits, but it also requires a completely different way of thinking about governments. The whole process is really logical, and it's designed to build trust from the ground up. First, you map the entire landscape to find those open circuits we talked about. Then, and this is the really genius part, you don't move all the money at once. You ignite the connection with just a tiny 2% test run, just to prove the pathway actually works. And only after that proof is validated do you release the other 98%. Yeah, let's just focus on that 2% for a second, because it is absolutely crucial. It completely de-risks the whole model. It lets all the partners test the connection and see the value flow with a really minimal commitment. It's basically a small-scale proof of concept that unlocks the full potential without asking anyone to take a huge, scary leap of faith. But for a system like this to work, it needs a fundamental shift in how we think about governance. Traditional models are all about control, centralizing power, hoarding knowledge. The R model is built on something different: coordination. The goal isn't to control everyone. It's to let all the partners keep their independence while working together and sharing the value that gets created. And the way it achieves that is by separating powers across 4 different entities. You've got one group for creating value, another for finding new opportunities, a third that holds the accounts for everyone involved, and that includes ecosystems, which is amazing, and a final one that's basically the system's rulebook. This separation is key because it stops any one entity from grabbing all the power. Okay, I know this can all feel a little bit abstract, so let's bring it back down to earth with a real-world simulation. The source material actually maps out how this could work for PJM, which is a massive US grid operator, and the huge data centers run by companies you've definitely heard of, like Google, Microsoft, and Amazon. So here's how it would play out. The discovery agent finds that, hey, PJM has a big budget for grid stability. And over here, Google has the ability to flexibly manage its data center's energy use. These two things can actually solve each other's problems. So they run that little 2% ignition test, it works, and boom, the full capital is released. But the best part? The success from that circuit then funds new circuits, like using the data center's waste heat to help the local watershed. And just look who's involved. The co-owners, right, they're the business partners who are creating the value. But the participants, the stakeholders who actually hold accounts and get the benefits, that includes the river basin, local tribal nations, communities, and even a trust for biodiversity. This is how you finally close the loop and stop pushing costs onto others.
So, what's the big picture here? When you zoom out, what you're really looking at is a blueprint for a totally new kind of economic engine. It's a huge shift away from what the source calls extraction economics and moving toward a model of completion economics.
And what's so powerful here is that this isn't about tearing down the whole system and starting over. Not at all. It's a really elegant upgrade. It takes the legal agreements and contracts that companies already use and just wraps them in a smart layer that lets them become these regenerative circuits, automatically closing loops and sharing value. And the potential upside here is, well, it's staggering. According to the modeling, this completion economics approach can be up to 64 times more efficient than traditional models. Get that. 64x. That's not just a small improvement, that's a complete phase shift in how we can think about creating value. Which leaves us all with a final, really provocative question to chew on. We spend so much energy trying to generate new capital to solve our biggest problems. But what if the answer isn't about making more? What if it's just about getting radically better at connecting the immense value that's already flowing, unseen, all around us?